My name is Ruth, and I am 72 years old. As a retired private investigator, I spent my career tirelessly uncovering truths that others wanted to keep buried, tracing lost connections that reunited families, and bringing closure to people who had lived with unanswered questions for decades. For 40 years, I balanced the demands of investigating other people's secrets with raising my children, Mark and Lisa, always building what I believed was a completely transparent life with my husband, Tom. I thought I truly knew my parents, Arthur and Mary, and believed our family history was an open book, a truth I held sacred, never imagining that the deepest deception of all could be hidden within my own bloodline. Then, on a quiet Saturday morning, while sorting through my parents' attic after their recent passing, I found a hidden adoption decree with my name on it. I was adopted. My entire life had been built on a fundamental lie that everyone but me seemed to know about. When I confronted my siblings, Mark and Lisa, they broke down and confessed that they had known all along. They claimed they had been covering it up to protect me, to preserve Mom and Dad's memory, as if the truth were something shameful that needed to be buried forever. This would shatter you. Mark stammered, his face pale with panic at being discovered. We couldn't let you find out. It would destroy everything beautiful about our family. Our whole life has been a lie. Lisa wept, not because she was learning the truth, but because she was terrified of what the truth might mean for the perfect family image we had all believed in. My entire past, my cherished childhood memories, my very sense of who I was. All of it had been built on a profound deception that my beloved parents had maintained until their graves. I felt profoundly alone, deceived by the very people I had trusted most. My reality irrevocably undermined by a lifetime of lies told in the name of love. Yet as despair threatened to consume what remained of my sense of self, a private investigator's unwavering drive for clarity ignited something unexpected, a cold, determined fury. What Mark, Lisa, and Mr. Davies, our family's longtime attorney, didn't know was my secret weapon, my meticulously organized personal archive containing decades of family documents, photos, and correspondence that I had saved out of sentiment, but which now held potential clues. Within that archive, subtle details that had never made sense suddenly formed a pattern. A faded travel itinerary from before my birth, a cryptic note written in my mother's Bible, an unusual doctor's receipt that had seemed insignificant for decades. My vast professional network, including a forensic genealogist who specialized in adoption cases, waited to be activated. This time, their insidious conspiracy of silence wouldn't just unravel. It would expose the full truth about my origins, guide me to my biological family, and force a complete redefinition of what family really meant, no matter how agonizing the cost might be for everyone involved. The confrontation with my siblings happened within hours of my discovery in the living room, where we had shared countless family gatherings over the decades. I had called them both, my voice shaking, as I asked them to come to my house immediately, telling them only that I had found something in our parents' attic that we needed to discuss. Mark arrived first, his usually confident demeanor replaced by obvious anxiety. Lisa followed 20 minutes later, her eyes already red from crying, as if she somehow knew what was coming. They sat across from me on the couch, where we had opened Christmas presents as children, their faces pale, with a fear that told me everything I needed to know before I even spoke. I placed the adoption decree on the coffee table between us, my hands trembling, as I watched their expressions shift from confusion to shock to something that looked almost like relief at finally being caught. "How long have you known?" I asked, my voice barely above a whisper, because I was afraid that speaking any louder would shatter whatever remained of my emotional control. Mark's response came immediately tumbling out in a rush of defensive panic. "Ruth, this can't be real. There has to be some mistake. How could Mom and Dad keep something like this from us? This would completely ruin their legacy, everything beautiful we believed about our family." He stood up and began pacing his hands, running through his hair, as he tried to process what this revelation might mean for the perfect family narrative we had all cherished. Maybe it's just old paperwork that got mixed up with their things. You know how Mom was about keeping everything. Let's just put it away. This is too much to deal with right now. But Lisa's response told me everything I needed to know about how long this secret had been kept. "I don't know what to believe anymore," she said through her tears, but her words carried the weight of someone who had been carrying a burden for far too long. "Our whole life has been a lie. What if people find out this would bring such shame on our family's memory?" The casual way she spoke about people finding out made it clear that this wasn't news to her. She had known perhaps for years and had been living with the knowledge that my entire identity was built on a foundation of deception. I tried to explain the devastating impact this discovery was having on my sense of self, hoping they would understand that my need for truth transcended their fear of social embarrassment. "Mark, Lisa, this isn't about ruining Mom and Dad's reputation. This is about my life, my identity, my right to know who I really am. Everything I believed about myself has been shattered. Can't you understand what this means to me?" But their response revealed how completely they prioritized appearance over authenticity, image over truth. Mark's voice took on the patronizing tone he used in business meetings when dealing with unreasonable clients. "Ruth, you're being dramatic about this. Think about what you're asking us to do. Do you want us to destroy everything good and pure about our parents' memory just because you found some old paperwork? They're gone now. What good could possibly come from dragging this up?" Lisa nodded through her tears, her voice shaking with what I initially thought was grief, but now realized was fear. "You're obsessing over old stories that don't matter anymore. Mom and Dad loved you. Isn't that enough? Why do you have to dig up things that will only cause pain?" The suggestion that my fundamental need to understand my own origins was nothing more than destructive obsession hit me like a physical blow. These were my siblings, people who had shared my childhood, who should have understood the magnitude of what I was experiencing. Instead, they were treating my existential crisis as an inconvenience that threatened their comfort. The situation became even more surreal when Mr. Davies entered the picture. Within days of my confrontation with Mark and Lisa, I received a formal letter from our family's longtime attorney, written on official letterhead that gave his words the weight of legal authority. The letter was carefully worded to avoid direct threats while making his position unmistakably clear. He wrote about the delicate nature of family legacies and the importance of discretion in matters that might cause unnecessary pain to surviving family members. He suggested that pursuing certain sensitive historical details could lead to potential complications that might be difficult to resolve satisfactorily. The implication was clear: if I continued to seek the truth about my adoption, there would be consequences. The lawyer who had handled my parents' estate, who had helped with their wills and witnessed their final wishes, was now working to ensure that their deepest secret remained buried with them. But it was Mark's ultimatum that finally shattered any remaining hope I had for family support in my search for truth. He called me 3 days after our initial confrontation, his voice cold and businesslike as he delivered what amounted to an emotional death sentence. "Ruth, we've talked about this, and Lisa and I are in agreement. If you continue to pursue this adoption thing, if you keep trying to dig up dirt on Mom and Dad, we're going to have to completely cut off contact with you. That includes the grandchildren. We won't have our children exposed to this kind of negativity and family destruction." The threat to cut me off from my grandchildren was designed to be the ultimate leverage, and Mark knew it. These children who called me Grandma Ruth and sought my advice about school problems and teenage heartbreak were being turned into weapons against my fundamental right to understand my own identity. "We're doing this to protect family peace and preserve our reputation in the community," he continued, as if the systematic erasure of my personal history was an act of love rather than manipulation. "People look up to our family. We have standing in this town that goes back generations. We can't let your selfishness destroy that." Lisa's agreement came in the form of silence. When I called her after Mark's ultimatum, hoping she might show some independence from her brother's controlling demands, she could barely speak through her tears. "I'm sorry, Ruth," she whispered, her voice breaking. "I know this is hard for you, but Mark is right. We have to think about what's best for everyone, not just what you want. Sometimes, the most loving thing is to let the past stay buried." As I hung up the phone that day, sitting alone in the house where I had raised my children and thought I understood my place in the world, I realized that I was facing something far worse than just a family secret. I was confronting a coordinated campaign to deny me the most basic human right, the right to know the truth about my own existence. The people who should have been my greatest allies in processing this life-altering discovery had instead become the guardians of the lie that had shaped my entire life. They were choosing the comfort of a beautiful fiction over their mothers' and sisters' right to authenticity, and they were willing to destroy our relationships to protect that choice. But as I sat in the gathering darkness of that evening, surrounded by photo albums and family mementos that now felt like props in an elaborate deception, I felt something stirring that I recognized from my professional life. It was the cold, analytical determination that came when I encountered a case where powerful people thought they could control the truth through intimidation and manipulation. They had made a crucial miscalculation. They assumed that threatening my family relationships would make me back down, that the fear of losing my grandchildren would force me to accept their version of reality. But 40 years of investigating other people's secrets had taught me something they seemed to have forgotten. The truth has a way of surfacing, no matter how deeply it's buried or how many people conspire to keep it hidden. The woman who had spent her career uncovering other families' mysteries was about to turn those same skills on her own past, regardless of what it might cost her in terms of the relationships she had always held most dear. The campaign to isolate me from anyone who might support my search for truth began within days of Mark's ultimatum, executed with the systematic precision of someone who understood exactly how to control a narrative. My siblings didn't just withdraw their own support. They actively worked to undermine any sympathy or assistance I might receive from our extended family and longtime friends. Mark's phone calls to our relatives followed a predictable pattern that I gradually pieced together through conversations with family members who remained loyal to me. He would begin by expressing concern about my mental state following our parents' death, suggesting that grief had made me confused and fixated on conspiracy theories about our family history. "We're really worried about Ruth," he would tell our cousin Janet, whom I had always been close to. "She's become obsessed with this idea that Mom and Dad were keeping secrets from her. It's like she wants to destroy their memory because she can't accept that they're gone. We don't know what to do with her anymore. The effectiveness of his campaign became clear when Janet called me her voice, careful and concerned, in a way that told me she had been thoroughly briefed on my supposed mental decline. "Ruth, honey," she said with the kind of gentle firmness usually reserved for dealing with confused elderly relatives. "Mark told me you've been going through some difficult times since Arthur and Mary passed. Maybe you should talk to someone professional about working through your grief instead of looking for problems that don't exist." It was devastating to realize that my own family members, people who had known me for decades and understood my professional competence and emotional stability, were being systematically turned against me through carefully crafted lies about my mental state. But it was Mark's conversation with his friend David that revealed the true depth of his callousness toward my suffering. I overheard this exchange by accident when I called his house, and he didn't realize I was still on the line after he thought he had hung up. "It's so exhausting dealing with Mom right now," he said, his voice carrying the tired irritation of someone discussing a persistent inconvenience. "She just can't let go of the past and accept that some things are better left buried. It's like she wants to ruin Grandma and Grandpa's perfect memory just to satisfy her own selfish curiosity." David's response was supportive in all the wrong ways. "You're doing the right thing protecting your family's reputation. Some people just can't understand that there are bigger things at stake than their personal feelings. Your kids don't need to grow up with the shame of some family scandal from decades ago." "Exactly," Mark replied, with obvious relief at being understood. "We can't let her destroy everything good about our family's legacy just because she's having some kind of identity crisis. It's all about her, always has been. She never thinks about how her actions affect the rest of us." Listening to my own son discuss my desperate search for identity as nothing more than selfish attention-seeking was like having my heart torn out while I was still conscious. The chilling clarity of his words revealed that this wasn't just about protecting a family secret. It was about protecting a carefully curated image that was more important to him than my fundamental right to understand my own origins. But it was in that moment of devastating realization that another memory surfaced, one so painful I had buried it deep in my consciousness for over 30 years. As I sat there reeling from the evidence of my children's betrayal, I remembered the secret I had kept about my adoptive mother, the sacrifice I had made that now seemed like a cruel preview of the deception that had shaped my own life. My adoptive mother, Mary, had suffered from a rare mental illness that caused periodic episodes of erratic behavior that could be both public and humiliating. During one particularly severe episode, when I was in my early 20s, she had wandered through downtown in her nightgown, speaking to imaginary people and creating a scene that had drawn police attention and local media coverage. The shame and stigma surrounding mental illness in those days meant that such public episodes could destroy a family's reputation permanently. Mary was mortified when she recovered from the episode, and Arthur was terrified that word would spread through their social circles and destroy the respectable image they had worked decades to build. As a young woman working as a university registrar with access to official documentation and public records, I had quietly orchestrated an elaborate cover-up. I had created false evidence of my mother's absence during the period of her episode, suggesting she had been visiting distant relatives rather than receiving psychiatric treatment. I had manipulated employment records, medical files, and even newspaper archives to ensure that no trace of her public breakdown would remain to embarrass our family. The process had required me to compromise my professional ethics in ways that haunted me for years afterward. I had falsified documents, lied to colleagues, and used my position of trust to rewrite history in service of protecting my mother's dignity. But I had done it willingly, believing that sometimes love required sacrifice, even sacrifice of one's own moral compass. Now, sitting with the evidence of my own adoption and the knowledge that my entire identity had been built on a lie, the irony was almost unbearable. The same woman, whose reputation I had protected through deception, had spent my entire life deceiving me about the most fundamental fact of my existence. The parents I had sacrificed my integrity to protect had never trusted me with the truth about who I really was. When I tried to hint at this history during a phone call with Mark, hoping that reminding him of our family's capacity for complicated truths might soften his position, his response revealed how completely he had rewritten our family's narrative to exclude anything inconvenient. "Mom, you're always trying to control Grandma's story, even now that she's gone," he snapped with obvious irritation. "Why can't you just let her rest in peace instead of digging up old difficulties that don't matter anymore? Just let it go." Lisa's reaction was even more dismissive, her voice trembling with what I had once thought was emotional sensitivity, but now recognized as manipulation. "Ruth, when you talk about Grandma like that, it makes her sound like a terrible person. Please stop trying to destroy her memory. You're being manipulative, trying to make us feel guilty about protecting the beautiful legacy she left us." But it was Mr. Davies who delivered the most sophisticated blow in what was clearly a coordinated effort to silence me permanently. The family attorney who had managed my parents' affairs for over 20 years called to suggest a meeting to discuss the practical implications of my recent discoveries. His office felt like a courtroom where I was on trial for the crime of wanting to understand my own life. He sat behind his imposing desk, surrounded by law books and family photos that spoke to decades of respectability and community standing, and delivered what amounted to a legal threat disguised as fatherly advice. "Ruth," he said with the kind of paternal authority that was designed to make me feel like a child being corrected for bad behavior, "your parents were pillars of this community. Arthur served on the school board for 15 years, and Mary's volunteer work touched hundreds of families. Their reputation is part of their legacy, something that benefits everyone who shares their name." He leaned forward, his voice taking on the tone of someone delivering an ultimatum. "Sometimes the most loving thing we can do for people we've lost is protect them from revelations that might tarnish how they're remembered. I'm sure you can understand that pursuing certain sensitive historical details might create complications that would be difficult for everyone involved." The meeting concluded with Mark's proposal for what he called a final family solution. He wanted me to sign a legally binding non-disclosure agreement that would permanently prohibit me from discussing my adoption or pursuing any investigation into my biological origins. In exchange, he offered a small inheritance from what he claimed was a separate account our parents had maintained money that would be mine if I agreed to move on and stop destroying the family's peace. The document he presented was clearly designed by Mr. Davies, full of legal language that would effectively sign away my right to my own truth in exchange for what amounted to hush money. It was the kind of agreement that powerful families use to bury scandals and protect reputations, and seeing it applied to my own desperate search for identity felt like the ultimate betrayal. "This is what's best for everyone," Mark said, as he slid the papers across my kitchen table, the same table where we had shared thousands of family meals. You get financial security, we get to preserve mom and dad's memory, and the grandchildren get to grow up proud of their family history instead of ashamed of some scandal from before they were born. Looking at that document, understanding that my own children were willing to pay me to disappear quietly into a life built on lies, I felt something crystallize in my chest that I hadn't experienced since my early days as a private investigator. It was the cold, implacable determination that came when I realized I was dealing with people who viewed truth as a commodity to be bought and sold rather than a fundamental human right. They had offered me a choice between comfortable deception and difficult truth, between family harmony and personal authenticity. They assumed I would choose the easier path, that the fear of losing their love would force me to accept their version of reality. But 40 years of uncovering other people's buried secrets had taught me something they seemed to have forgotten sometimes. The most important investigations are the ones that cost you everything you thought you wanted in order to give you the one thing you actually need. The woman who had spent her career helping others find closure was about to discover what it would cost to find the truth about her own life, regardless of how many people she loved tried to stop her. The final act of betrayal came with the calculated precision of a legal execution designed not just to exclude me from my family, but to criminalize any further attempts I might make to understand my own origins. The letter arrived on official legal letterhead, delivered by certified mail on a Tuesday morning, that would forever mark the end of the family I thought I belonged to. Mr. Davies had crafted the document with devastating effectiveness, using his decades of legal experience to create what amounted to a restraining order disguised as family correspondence. The letter formally notified me that Mark and Lisa were severing all familial ties due to my pattern of emotional harassment and obsessive behavior regarding deceased family members. The language was clinical and damning, transforming my search for identity into evidence of mental instability, my desperate need for truth into proof of dangerous fixation. The document claimed that my continued pursuit of unfounded conspiracy theories regarding my parents' past was causing severe emotional distress to my children and grandchildren who needed to be protected from further psychological harm. Most devastating of all, the letter included a formal threat of legal action if I attempted any further contact with my family. Mark and Lisa were prepared to seek a restraining order that would legally prohibit me from approaching their homes, their workplaces, or their children's schools. They were turning me into a criminal for the crime of wanting to understand my own life. Reading that document, seeing my role as loving mother and grandmother transformed into that of a dangerous stalker whose very existence threatened my family's well-being, I felt my understanding of reality shift in ways that left me gasping for air. The legal system that was supposed to protect families had been weaponized against the very foundation of family truth and connection, but I wasn't quite ready to surrender to their narrative of my supposed madness. In one last desperate attempt to reach whatever humanity remained in my children's hearts, I decided to create a tangible reminder of what we had once shared, what they were choosing to destroy in service of protecting a lie. I spent an entire weekend creating a photo album of our most precious memories. Together, Mark's first day of school, when he had clutched my hand and whispered that he hoped he would be brave enough to make me proud. Lisa's wedding day, when she had asked me to help her get ready because she said my presence made her feel safe and loved. Christmas mornings when my grandchildren had fallen asleep in my lap after opening presents, their faces peaceful with the security of unconditional family love. I included photos of moments with my adoptive parents, that had seemed so genuine at the time Arthur teaching the children to fish at the lake, Mary braiding Lisa's hair for her first school dance family vacations, where we had laughed until our sides hurt and felt grateful for the blessing of belonging to each other. Along with the photographs, I wrote a letter that poured my heart onto paper in ways I had never been able to do in person. I wrote about the little boy who used to bring me drawings of our family and tell me I was the best mom in the world. I wrote about the daughter who used to seek my advice on everything from career decisions to relationship troubles, trusting that I would always listen without judgment. I reminded them of the values we had once shared, the importance of honesty, the value of facing difficult truths together, the understanding that family love meant accepting each other's pain rather than demanding that it be hidden for the sake of appearances. I left the album on Mark's front porch, hoping that seeing our history laid out in photographs might spark some recognition of what we were all losing, some small crack in the wall of denial they had built around their hearts. 3 days later, I discovered their response through social media in a way that felt deliberately designed to maximize my humiliation. Brenda, Mark's wife, had posted a photograph on her Instagram account that stopped my heart. It showed my carefully compiled album torn apart, the pictures scattered, and many of them visibly cut into pieces with scissors. My handwritten letter had been shredded into confetti-like strips that were barely recognizable as text. Her caption was a masterpiece of calculated cruelty. Spring cleaning day, getting rid of clutter, and moving forward from negativity. Some people just can't let go of the past and keep trying to manipulate with desperate attempts at emotional blackmail. Grateful for the wisdom to recognize toxic behavior disguised as love. The image of my grandchildren's baby pictures lying in shreds of my expressions of love, reduced to garbage, hit me with a force that was almost physical. These weren't just photographs. They were the only tangible proof that our family's love had once been real, that the connections I remembered hadn't been figments of my confused imagination. Seeing those memories destroyed and mocked, publicly shared for the entertainment and approval of strangers who would never understand what they were witnessing, I finally grasped the complete finality of what my children had chosen. They hadn't just rejected my search for truth. They had rejected our entire shared history, deciding that our decades of love were less important than maintaining their current narrative of my mental decline. Mark's response came in the form of a text message that felt like a final sentencing. "Consider this matter closed, Mom. Do not attempt to contact us again, ever. Your obsession with conspiracy theories has caused enough damage to our family." Lisa's contribution came through her systematic campaign among our mutual friends and extended family members, spreading carefully crafted stories about my supposed mental deterioration and dangerous fixation on destroying our parents' memory. Her version of events painted me as an unstable woman who had become obsessed with fictional scandals because I couldn't accept the natural grief that followed my parents' death. "We're really worried about Mom," she would tell anyone who would listen, her voice carefully modulated to convey both concern and exhaustion. "She's developed these paranoid delusions about family secrets that don't exist. It's like she can't accept that Mom and Dad were just good, simple people who loved us. She needs professional help, but she refuses to acknowledge that there's a problem." But it was Mr. Davies who delivered the final blow to any remaining hope I had for justice or understanding. In a brief statement published in the local newspaper's community notes section, he wrote about the importance of discretion in family matters and the wisdom of protecting loved ones' legacies from unfounded speculation. He positioned himself as the voice of reason in a situation involving an unstable elderly woman who was attempting to damage her deceased parents' reputation for attention. It was in this moment of complete isolation, sitting alone in my house with the image of my destroyed photo album still vivid in my memory, that I finally allowed myself to confront the most devastating secret of all. The truth about my biological origins that would redefine everything I thought I knew about deception power and the lengths that prominent families would go to protect their reputations. Through my professional contacts in genealogical research, I had been quietly investigating the circumstances of my birth, following paper trails and DNA connections that led to a truth more horrifying than anything I could have imagined. My birth mother hadn't been an unmarried teenager who gave up her baby for a better life, as I had initially assumed. She had been a young woman from one of the most prominent families in our county, and my conception had been the result of a violent assault by a powerful older man who held significant influence in local politics and business. The family, desperate to avoid a scandal that would have destroyed their reputation and cost them millions in social standing and legal fees, had orchestrated a cover-up of staggering complexity. They had worked with a corrupt doctor, Dr. Thompson, to falsify birth records and create an elaborate story about my mother's temporary absence for health reasons. The adoption had been arranged not through official channels, but through a private agreement that involved substantial payments to my adoptive parents in exchange for their silence and their promise to raise me far enough away that I would never accidentally encounter my biological family. The secret had been kept for over 70 years, involving dozens of people who had been paid, threatened, or otherwise convinced to maintain their silence about a crime that had been transformed into a convenient disappearance. My entire life had been built on a foundation of lies designed to protect a rapist and his victim's family from the consequences of his actions. My adoptive parents hadn't just been keeping a simple adoption secret. They had been complicit in covering up a violent crime and denying me any chance of ever knowing the truth about my origins. Every birthday celebration, every family gathering, every moment of love and connection had been shadowed by their knowledge that my very existence was the result of violence that they were helping to conceal. The cosmic irony was devastating. The woman who had spent her career helping victims find justice had discovered that she was herself the victim of an injustice so profound that it had shaped every day of her existence. The parents who had raised her with love had also raised her with lies that protected the man who had committed the crime that brought her into being. But even in that moment of overwhelming realization, as I contemplated the possibility that my entire understanding of family love and truth had been built on quicksand, I felt something stirring in the deepest part of my soul. It wasn't hope exactly, though that was present. It wasn't even anger, though, that burned steady and fierce. It was the recognition that the woman who had spent her career uncovering other people's buried secrets was about to face the most important investigation of her life. Not just to find her biological family, but to expose a conspiracy that had hidden a violent crime for 7 decades and denied countless people the truth they deserved to know. For the first time since finding that adoption decree, I began to plan my counterattack. The restraining order transformed my life from one of purposeful investigation into a psychological prison where every day brought new evidence of how completely I had been erased from my own family's narrative. The silence that filled my house wasn't just the absence of family contact. It was the suffocating weight of carrying secrets that felt like they were slowly destroying my sanity. Every morning, I woke up to the crushing realization that my entire life had been built on a foundation of lies so elaborate and long-standing that they involved generations of complicit adults who had agreed that my right to truth was less important than protecting a violent criminal's reputation. The documents I had once treasured as evidence of my family's love and stability now felt like props in an elaborate deception that had lasted over 70 years. My career as a private investigator had been built on my ability to distinguish truth from fabrication, to see through carefully constructed lies and uncover the reality that people desperately wanted to keep hidden. Now I was forced to confront the terrifying possibility that I had been living inside the most sophisticated deception of my professional experience, unable to see it, because I had been too emotionally invested in the lie to recognize it for what it was. The professional destruction that followed was swift and devastating, orchestrated with a precision that suggested careful coordination between people who understood exactly how to destroy a reputation built over decades of meticulous work. Mr. Davies, using his connections in legal and academic circles, began reaching out to university registrar networks and public records associations, where I had built my professional reputation. His approach was subtle but deadly effective, expressing concern about my recent behavior and wondering whether age-related cognitive decline might explain some troubling patterns he had observed in my recent work. He spoke about my increasing fixation on conspiracy theories and my inability to accept straightforward explanations for historical events. "I hate to bring this up," he would tell former colleagues with perfectly calibrated professional concern, "but Ruth has been making some very serious accusations about prominent local families based on what appears to be misinterpretation of standard legal documents. We're worried that she may be experiencing some form of dementia that's affecting her judgment about historical accuracy." But it was when a new player entered the conspiracy that I realized the true scope of what I was facing. Daniel, who claimed to be my biological half-brother and a legitimate heir to my adoptive parents' estate, had appeared seemingly from nowhere with legal documentation that supported his claim to a portion of the inheritance I thought was rightfully mine. His lawsuit against me was a masterpiece of legal manipulation, claiming that my false accusations about the family's history had caused him severe emotional distress and damaged his reputation in the community. He demanded not just financial compensation, but a court order that would prohibit me from making any further defamatory statements about the family whose bloodline he claimed to share. The speed of my financial collapse was breathtaking and clearly coordinated. Mark had reported suspicious activity in my bank accounts to financial institutions, claiming he was concerned about my mental capacity to manage money responsibly. The result was immediate freezing of my assets, pending a competency evaluation that could take months to complete. Meanwhile, the legal fees from defending against Daniel's lawsuit and the mounting costs of my own investigation into my origins consumed what little money I could access. Within weeks, I couldn't afford to pay rent on the small apartment I had moved to after losing my family home, and I found myself facing eviction with nowhere else to turn. The eviction itself was orchestrated as a public spectacle designed to cement my image as a mentally unstable woman whose family had been forced to abandon her for their own protection. Brenda had somehow arranged for local media to cover the story, framing it as a cautionary tale about what happens when elderly people refuse help for mental health issues. Bait. The news cameras captured me standing on the sidewalk with my few remaining possessions in garbage bags, the image broadcast as evidence of what happens when families fail to intervene appropriately, when an elderly relative begins showing signs of declining judgment. It's heartbreaking to watch someone you love destroy their own life. Brenda told the reporter with tears that appeared genuine to anyone who didn't know her capacity for performance. We tried everything to help her, but she became so paranoid and resistant to support that we had to protect our children from her increasingly erratic behavior. But it was my grandchildren's public disavowal that finally shattered whatever remained of my emotional defenses. Mark and Lisa had orchestrated their participation in a charity event for Family Transparency, an organization that supposedly helped families uncover and heal from hidden secrets and generational trauma. The irony was devastating. My grandchildren, Tom and Emily, were being used as spokespersons for the very kind of truth-seeking that their parents were systematically trying to destroy in my case, but their speeches had been carefully crafted to support the narrative that I was a dangerous source of false information rather than a legitimate seeker of family truth. Tom, now 15, and clearly coached in what to say, delivered a polished presentation about the importance of uncovering hidden family truths, while subtly dismissing my decades of record-keeping as misleading and biased by personal agenda. Sometimes, he said with the earnest confidence of youth, older family members can become confused about past events and start seeing conspiracies where there are just normal family stories. It's important to rely on official documentation and professional guidance rather than letting emotional family members rewrite history. Emily, only 13, but already fluent in the language of dismissal she had learned from her parents, presented a drawing of her ideal, honest family that conspicuously excluded any representation of me. When asked about her artistic choices, she explained that healthy families focus on truth and transparency, and sometimes that means not including people who spread confusion and lies. Watching my grandchildren, whom I had helped raise and guide through their early years, publicly condemn me as a source of dangerous misinformation was like watching my own legacy being systematically erased before my eyes. These children had been taught to see my search for truth as evidence of mental illness, my professional expertise as proof of instability. But in my darkest moment, when I was literally living in a homeless shelter and contemplating whether I had the strength to continue fighting, an unexpected voice reached out from my professional past. Margaret Chen, a woman I had trained as a university registrar 30 years earlier, contacted me after hearing about my situation through professional networks. Ruth, she said when she found me at the shelter, her voice steady, with the kind of professional respect I hadn't heard in months. I don't know what's really happening with your family, but I know who you are professionally. You're the most meticulous and ethical person I've ever worked with. If you say there's something wrong with these records, then there's something wrong with these records. Margaret didn't just offer moral support. She provided something far more valuable: access to a network of retired legal professionals who specialized in complex public records fraud and had the resources to help me fight back against the systematic campaign being waged against me. There are people who remember your real work, she told me, her hand steady on my trembling shoulder. And we're not going to let them destroy the reputation you spent 40 years building just because the truth is inconvenient for some powerful families. For the first time in months, sitting in that sterile shelter surrounded by other discarded souls, I felt something I had almost forgotten: professional validation, that my skills and judgment weren't delusions, that my search for truth wasn't the paranoid fantasy my family claimed it was. The fight was far from over, but now I had allies who understood the difference between legitimate investigation and mental illness, between seeking justice and spreading conspiracy theories. Most importantly, I was beginning to remember who I really was beneath the layers of doubt and shame my own family had heaped upon me. The woman who had spent her career uncovering other people's buried secrets was about to discover what it would take to expose the most sophisticated cover-up she had ever encountered, one that had shaped her entire existence and involved some of the most powerful people in her community. The Community Heritage exhibit was announced with the kind of fanfare usually reserved for major cultural events, prominently featured on the front page of our local newspaper as a celebration of the families who had built our town's proud history. Seeing the historical society where I had once volunteered being transformed into a platform for the systematic rewriting of my family's past felt like watching vandals desecrate a sacred space. Mark and Lisa, leveraging their social standing and the considerable influence their successful careers had given them in the community, had convinced the Historical Society Board to create an exhibit that would honor the founding families of our area. The timing was no coincidence. It was a direct response to my ongoing investigation into my origins, designed to create an official public record that would contradict everything I was trying to uncover. The exhibit featured beautifully mounted displays with professional quality photographs, meticulously researched timelines, and what appeared to be authentic historical documents that told the story of prominent local families, including the one that had adopted me. But I recognized the subtle signs of manipulation from my years of working with public records. Documents that had been selectively edited, photographs that had been carefully cropped, and timelines that omitted crucial events and people. My adoptive parents were presented as pillars of the community who had lived exemplary lives of service and integrity. There was no mention of any adoption, no reference to any children other than Mark and Lisa, and certainly no hint of the violent crime that had led to my conception. The exhibit presented a sanitized version of family history that erased not just my biological origins, but my very existence as their daughter. But the most devastating aspect wasn't what the exhibit contained. It was what it represented. This was a public official declaration that the truth I was seeking didn't exist, that my investigation was based on delusions rather than facts, and that my professional expertise was no longer to be trusted when it came to interpreting historical evidence. Mark's role as one of the featured speakers at the exhibit's opening gave him a platform to position himself as a guardian of historical accuracy and family values. His presentation, titled "Preserving Our Heritage: The Importance of Accurate Historical Documentation," was a masterclass in using legitimate concerns about historical accuracy to undermine my credibility. In our modern age, he said to the gathered crowd of community leaders and local media, we see too many examples of people rewriting history to serve personal agendas rather than preserving the truth for future generations. It's crucial that we rely on verified documentation and professional standards, rather than allowing emotional family members to contaminate the historical record with unfounded speculation. His words were carefully chosen to sound like objective academic principles while delivering pointed attacks on my character and professional competence. He spoke about the importance of protecting established family legacies from revisionist theories, and the need for clear boundaries between legitimate historical research and personal vendetta. Lisa's contribution came in the form of a panel discussion about healing family wounds through accurate history. She spoke with practiced vulnerability about the importance of preserving the beautiful legacy our parents left us, and not allowing confusion or mental health issues to contaminate how we remember our loved ones. Sometimes, she said with perfectly calibrated emotion, the most loving thing we can do for people who are struggling with reality is to maintain clear factual boundaries about what actually happened in the past. We can't let personal pain rewrite documented history. From the homeless shelter where I was now living, I learned about the exhibit through a sympathetic former colleague who managed to obtain a copy of the promotional brochure and mail it to me. Reading through the materials, seeing my life's work systematically undermined, and my family's true history publicly rewritten by my own children, felt like watching my professional obituary being written while I was still alive. The brochure featured quotes from community leaders praising the exhibit as an important corrective to recent misinformation and a necessary restoration of historical accuracy. Mr. Davies was prominently featured as a legal expert who had helped verify the authenticity of the documents displayed, lending the weight of professional authority to what I recognized as an elaborate fraud. But it was my grandchildren's participation that delivered the final blow to whatever hope I had maintained for family reconciliation. Tom and Emily had been brought to the exhibit as representatives of the next generation who would inherit and preserve these family legacies. The local newspaper's coverage included a photo of them standing proudly in front of the display about their great-grandparents, their young faces serious with the importance of their role as family historians. Tom was quoted as saying that he was proud to learn the real story of his family's heritage, while Emily spoke about how important it is to have the facts instead of confusing stories. Their words had clearly been coached, but their apparent belief in what they were saying was what made the betrayal so complete. These children, whom I had taught to value truth and accuracy in all things, had been systematically programmed to see my search for truth as dangerous misinformation that threatened their family's honor. The exhibit's accompanying seminar on genealogical ethics featured Mr. Davies as the keynote speaker, giving him a platform to establish the legal and ethical framework that would justify my family's actions against me. His presentation, titled "When Family Research Goes Wrong: Legal and Ethical Boundaries in Genealogical Investigation," was a thinly veiled attack on everything I represented. He spoke about cases where individuals fabricate family histories for personal gain, and the importance of protecting families from members who use genealogical research as a weapon. While he never mentioned me by name, anyone familiar with my situation would understand exactly who he was discussing. Sometimes, he concluded with the authority of decades in family law. The most ethical thing genealogical researchers can do is recognize when their personal involvement in a family system makes them incapable of objective analysis. Professional standards require us to step back when our emotional investment begins to compromise our judgment. As I sat in the shelter that evening, reading coverage of the seminar and seeing my life's work transformed into a cautionary tale about the dangers of amateur genealogical research, I felt something break inside me that I wasn't sure could ever be repaired. The exhibit wasn't just rewriting my family's history. It was establishing a public record that would make it nearly impossible for me to ever prove the truth about my origins. But just as I was about to surrender to the overwhelming weight of institutional opposition, an unexpected ally emerged from my professional past. William Foster, a retired town archivist who was nearing 90, but still sharp as a tack, approached me outside the shelter where I was living. "Ruth," he said, his aged voice still carrying the authority of someone who had spent 70 years working with historical documents. "I've been following what's happening to you, and I need to tell you something important." His revelation was like lightning striking my consciousness. Years earlier, when I had been focused on other duties, he had witnessed Dr. Thompson, the family physician, who had supposedly delivered me attempting to retrieve or alter very old birth records from the county archives. At the time, William had found it suspicious but hadn't known what to make of it. That doctor was nervous as a cat in a thunderstorm. William told me his memory as clear as if it had happened yesterday. He kept looking around to make sure nobody was watching, and when he saw me, he made up some story about needing to verify dates for a patient's insurance claim. But Ruth, nobody goes into birth records from the 1950s for insurance claims. This small but crucial piece of evidence confirmed what I had begun to suspect. The cover-up of my origins hadn't been a one-time event, but an ongoing conspiracy that had required periodic maintenance to keep the truth buried. Dr. Thompson's attempt to alter historical records proved that there were documents that contradicted the official story, and that powerful people were still working to keep those contradictions hidden. For the first time since this nightmare began, I had evidence that someone besides me recognized that the official family history didn't match the documentary record. More importantly, I had an ally whose professional reputation and advanced age made him virtually immune to the kind of character assassination that had been used against me. The woman who had spent her career preserving historical truth was about to discover whether decades of professional expertise and one elderly archivist's witness testimony could overcome the most sophisticated historical revision she had ever encountered. The final financial assault came with the precision of a coordinated military operation designed not just to bankrupt me, but to destroy my ability to continue investigating my own origins. Daniel, the man claiming to be my biological half-brother, had clearly been coached by legal experts who understood exactly how to use the court system as a weapon against someone with limited resources. His lawsuit against me demanded $250,000 in damages for what he claimed was systematic defamation of his family's reputation. The legal documents painted me as a delusional woman who was spreading malicious lies about prominent community members based on fabricated evidence and paranoid conspiracy theories. But the lawsuit was just the opening move in a broader campaign of financial destruction. Working in coordination with Mark and Lisa, Daniel had contacted my former university and every professional organization I had ever belonged to, presenting himself as a concerned family member, trying to protect the community from my increasingly erratic behavior. "I'm deeply worried about Ruth's mental state," he told the administrators at my former university, his voice carrying the perfect blend of familial concern and civic responsibility. "She's been making wild accusations about respected local families based on documents she claims to have found, but which appear to have been altered or completely fabricated. I think she may be suffering from some form of dementia that's affecting her judgment about historical accuracy." His campaign was devastatingly effective because it positioned him as a responsible family member, trying to protect both the community and me from the consequences of my supposed mental decline. University administrators faced with potential liability issues quickly moved to distance themselves from any association with my work or reputation. My modest pension from years of university service was frozen, pending a competency evaluation, and my access to professional archives and databases was quietly revoked. The small income that had allowed me to maintain some independence while pursuing my investigation disappeared overnight, leaving me completely dependent on whatever assistance I could find. The mounting legal fees from defending against Daniel's lawsuit consumed what little savings I had managed to preserve after Mark's earlier financial manipulations. The attorney I was able to afford was clearly outmatched by the team of lawyers representing Daniel, who seemed to have unlimited resources for depositions, expert witnesses, and procedural delays designed to drain my resources. Within months, I was facing eviction from the small apartment that had been my refuge after losing my family home. The landlord, pressured by complaints about my disturbing behavior from neighbors who had been contacted by my family, was eager to remove what he saw as a problematic tenant who might damage his property's reputation. The eviction was timed and orchestrated to maximize my public humiliation. Brenda had somehow arranged for local media to be present when the sheriff's deputies arrived to remove me and my belongings from the apartment. The story was framed as a tragic example of what happens when families fail to intervene appropriately with elderly relatives who refuse help for mental health issues. This is exactly why it's so important for families to take action when they see signs of cognitive decline. The news anchor explained as footage of me standing on the sidewalk with my possessions in garbage bags filled television screens across the community. Early intervention might have prevented this tragic outcome. Mark and Lisa's response to my homelessness was chilling in its calculated indifference. When approached by reporters for comment on my situation, Mark issued a statement through his business expressing sadness about my condition while making it clear that they had exhausted all available options for providing appropriate support. Sometimes the most loving thing you can do for someone who refuses help is allow them to experience the natural consequences of their choices, he said, with the kind of measured wisdom that made him sound like a grief counselor rather than a son abandoning his mother. We hope this will finally convince her to accept the professional assistance she needs. Lisa's contribution came through her social media presence, where she posted about the challenges of loving someone who refuses to accept reality, while sharing inspirational quotes about protecting your peace from toxic family members. Her posts never mentioned me directly, but followers who knew our family situation understood exactly who she was discussing. But it was Daniel's public display of wealth that felt like the most calculated insult of all. Using money from the inheritance he had claimed was rightfully his, he purchased a luxury sports car that he made sure was prominently featured in local society pages. The car, which cost more than I had earned in 2 years of university work, was presented as a tribute to the family legacy he was proud to carry forward. His interview with the local newspaper's lifestyle section was a masterclass in public manipulation, presenting himself as a successful businessman who had overcome the challenges of growing up with family secrets to achieve prosperity and stability. He spoke about the importance of moving forward from painful family histories and not letting the confusion of unstable relatives diminish your own success. The photograph accompanying the article showed him standing beside his new car with a confident smile, looking every inch the successful family member who had managed to thrive despite the burden of dealing with difficult relatives. The contrast with my current situation was clearly intentional, designed to demonstrate the difference between someone who accepted reality and someone who remained trapped in delusion. The physical toll of this relentless financial and emotional siege finally became too much for my 72-year-old body to bear. The stress of homelessness, the inadequate nutrition available at the shelter, and the constant anxiety of fighting legal battles I couldn't afford triggered a massive stroke that left me unconscious in the emergency room of the county hospital. For 4 days, I lay in intensive care while my body fought to recover from the damage that months of systematic persecution had inflicted. My speech was slurred, my memory was fragmented, and my left side was partially paralyzed from the stroke. The medical team spoke about me in the past tense, discussing quality of life issues and advanced directives, as if my recovery was unlikely. But it was during those long hours, drifting between consciousness and unconsciousness, that something unexpected happened. As I lay connected to machines that monitored my failing body, fragments of memory began to surface from deep in my subconscious, pieces of conversations I had buried because they were too painful or too confusing to process at the time. I remembered a conversation from my early 20s when I was working as a university registrar and had overheard my adoptive father arguing with Mr. Davies about a secret client and documents that needed to be modified related to an estate case from decades earlier. At the time, I had dismissed it as normal legal business that didn't concern me. But now, with the clarity that sometimes comes from approaching death, I understood that conversation in a completely different context. My father hadn't just been a passive recipient of someone else's adoption arrangements. He had been an active participant in covering up the crime that had led to my conception, helping to falsify records and create the elaborate fiction that had shaped my entire life. The realization that my adoptive father had been complicit in hiding the truth about my origins, that he had worked with the same lawyer who was now helping my children destroy me, hit me with a force that felt like another stroke. Every expression of love, every moment of family connection, every memory I treasured had been shadowed by his knowledge that my existence was the result of a violent crime he was helping to conceal. But even in that moment of overwhelming betrayal, I felt something stir in the deepest part of my soul. It wasn't hope exactly, though, that was present. It wasn't even determination, though, that was growing stronger with each revelation. It was the recognition that the woman who had spent her career uncovering buried truths was facing the most important investigation of her life, not just finding her biological family, but exposing a conspiracy that had hidden a violent crime for over 70 years and continued to operate through the very people who claimed to love her. From my hospital bed, weak but alive and burning, with newfound clarity about the conspiracy that had shaped my entire existence, I felt a determination I hadn't experienced since my early days as a private investigator. The stroke had damaged my body, but it had also crystallized my understanding of what I was really fighting against, not just family secrets, but a systematic cover-up of violent crime that had lasted for over 70 years. With the help of Jennifer, a compassionate night nurse who had been horrified by my complete isolation during the darkest days of my hospitalization, I managed to record a video message on my phone. My speech was still slurred from the stroke, and my hands trembled from the medication, but my mind was clearer than it had been in months. In the 30-minute recording, I methodically laid out the evidence I had gathered about my biological origins, the cover-up that had hidden the truth about my conception, and the ongoing conspiracy to silence me. I played audio recordings I had secretly made during family confrontations, capturing Mark and Lisa's explicit dismissal of my right to know the truth about my own identity. Listen to their voices. I said to the camera, my words careful but determined despite my physical limitations. These are people who claim to love me, but who are willing to destroy me rather than acknowledge that their perfect family image was built on a foundation of lies and cover-ups. But the most powerful part of the recording came when I played a voicemail my adoptive mother had left me years before her death, a message I had saved sentimentally but never really understood until now. In it, her voice was heavy with what I had thought was general sadness, but now recognized as specific guilt. Ruth Darling, her recorded voice, said through my phone's speaker, "I hope you know that everything we did because we loved you. Sometimes love means making choices that protect people from truths that might hurt them more than help them. I pray someday you'll understand that we thought we were doing the right thing." At the time, I had assumed she was talking about normal parental decisions, the kind of protective choices all parents make. Now I understood she was confessing to a lifetime of deception while asking for forgiveness she didn't think she deserved. The recording was my final attempt to reach whatever humanity remained in my children, my last appeal for them to choose truth over the continued protection of a violent criminal's reputation. I asked Jennifer to send it directly to Mark and Lisa's email addresses, hoping that seeing my obvious physical decline might shock them into recognizing what their campaign against me was costing. But I had underestimated the reach of the conspiracy arrayed against me. Daniel, the man claiming to be my biological half-brother, had been monitoring my communications through bribed hospital staff and sophisticated surveillance technology. He intercepted my video message before Mark and Lisa could see it, recognizing it as a potential threat to the narrative they had all worked so hard to establish. Within hours, my raw emotional confession had been digitally manipulated using editing software that transformed my slurred speech into what appeared to be the incoherent rambling of a severely mentally ill woman. Daniel carefully spliced sentences to change their meaning, added ominous background music that made my words sound threatening rather than pleading, and cut out crucial context that would have explained my references to family secrets and cover-ups. The doctored video was then sold to a national news outlet that specialized in sensational stories about family dysfunction and elder mental health. The story was framed as an exposé of what happens when untreated mental illness combines with internet conspiracy theories to create dangerous delusions about prominent families. This tragic case illustrates the growing problem of elderly Americans who become convinced that their families are part of elaborate conspiracies. The news anchor explained as my distorted image filled television screens across the country. Mental health experts warn that these kinds of paranoid delusions can lead to serious accusations against innocent family members. The manipulated video went viral within hours, shared across social media platforms with commentary that ranged from pity to outrage. Viewers who saw only the edited version were horrified by what appeared to be a mentally ill woman making wild accusations against her family while clearly suffering from severe cognitive decline. Mark and Lisa's response was swift and devastating. They appeared on national television within 24 hours of the video's release, giving interviews that were masterpieces of public manipulation. Sitting together with Brenda, positioned supportively beside them, they spoke with perfect sincerity about their heartbreak over my deteriorating condition. Watching someone you love disappear into mental illness is one of the most painful experiences a family can face. Mark said, his voice catching with what appeared to be genuine emotion. The woman in that video isn't the mother who raised us. She's become someone we don't recognize, someone who sees threats and conspiracies where there are only people trying to help her. Lisa's contribution was even more devastating because it carried the weight of a daughter's supposed grief. "We've tried everything," she said through carefully timed tears. Professional intervention, family counseling, even legal boundaries when her accusations became dangerous. But you can't help someone who refuses to acknowledge that they need help. Brenda's presence during the interview sent a subtle but unmistakable message about family unity in the face of my supposed instability. Her occasional nods of agreement and looks of sympathetic concern reinforced their narrative while positioning her as the reasonable daughter-in-law dealing with an impossible situation. "We just want her to find peace," Mark concluded, looking directly into the camera, with eyes that appeared to hold genuine love and concern. "But we also have to protect our children from exposure to these kinds of delusions. Sometimes the most loving thing you can do is maintain boundaries with people who refuse to accept reality." Watching my children perform their grief over my supposed mental decline while simultaneously orchestrating my public humiliation was like witnessing my own funeral while being forced to applaud the eulogies. They had taken my most desperate attempt to reach them with truth and transformed it into the ultimate proof of everything they claimed about my character. But even as I felt the crushing weight of complete defeat, an unexpected ally emerged from my professional past. Dr. Sarah Martinez, the forensic genealogist who had been working with me to trace my biological origins, had been following the media coverage with growing alarm and professional outrage. As someone with expertise in both genealogical research and digital forensics, Dr. Martinez immediately recognized the signs of sophisticated manipulation in the viral video. She contacted Margaret Chen, my former trainee, who had been organizing legal support for me, and together they began building a case that would expose the fraud that had been perpetrated against me. "This isn't just character assassination," Dr. Martinez told the growing network of advocates who were rallying to my defense. "This is a coordinated disinformation campaign using advanced technology to literally put words in someone's mouth. The technical analysis alone proves that this video has been extensively manipulated." More importantly, Dr. Martinez had been making breakthrough discoveries in her research into my biological origins. Using DNA analysis and genealogical databases that hadn't existed when the original cover-up was orchestrated, she had identified my biological family and was beginning to piece together the true circumstances of my conception. I have documentary evidence that Ruth's biological father was indeed a prominent local official, and that her conception was the result of a sexual assault that was covered up through an elaborate conspiracy involving multiple family attorneys and medical professionals. She said with obvious anger at what she was discovering. For the first time in months, I had objective evidence that my search for truth wasn't the paranoid delusion my family claimed it was. The technical proof that my video had been manipulated, combined with the genealogical evidence Dr. Martinez was uncovering, provided a foundation for fighting back against the most sophisticated campaign of deception and character assassination I had ever encountered. The woman who had spent her career helping others uncover buried family secrets was about to discover whether the truth really did have the power to overcome decades of conspiracy manipulation and the kind of institutional protection that had kept a violent crime hidden for over 70 years. But as I lay in that hospital bed, watching my public execution play out on every news channel and social media platform, I wondered if justice could ever catch up to a lie that had become so embedded in my community's power structure that exposing it would threaten the reputations of some of the most influential families in our area. The final battle for my reputation, my legacy, and my very right to exist as someone worthy of truth and dignity was about to begin. The breakthrough that changed everything came from an unexpected combination of old-fashioned detective work and cutting-edge forensic technology. Armed with the evidence that my video had been manipulated and the genealogical discoveries, Dr. Martinez had been making my legal team launched a massive federal civil and criminal lawsuit that would expose the full scope of the conspiracy that had shaped my entire life. The charges were comprehensive and devastating fraud, conspiracy to conceal identity, systematic elder abuse, and criminal defamation. But most importantly, the lawsuit included federal charges related to the falsification of government documents that had occurred decades earlier, crimes that had no statute of limitations because they involved ongoing conspiracy to maintain fraudulent records. The case attracted national attention, not just because of the viral video that had destroyed my reputation, but because it represented the first major legal challenge to expose a decades-old cover-up involving prominent families, corrupt medical professionals, and the systematic falsification of public records to hide violent crimes. When the trial began 6 months later, the courtroom was packed with media representatives from around the world. The story had captured public imagination because it combined elements of family betrayal, institutional corruption, and the kind of sophisticated deception that most people assumed only happened in movies. I sat at the plaintiff's table still bearing the physical effects of my stroke, but mentally sharper than I had been in years. The months of preparation had given me a sense of purpose I hadn't felt since my days as an active private investigator, and I was finally going to see justice for crimes that had been hidden for over 70 years. The moment that shattered the defense's case came when Dr. Martinez took the stand as our expert witness in forensic genealogy. She had spent months meticulously reconstructing my biological family tree using DNA evidence, obscure public records, and cross-referencing techniques that hadn't existed when the original cover-up was orchestrated. Your Honor, members of the jury, she began, her voice carrying the authority of someone who had spent 30 years working with historical documents. I'm about to present evidence that will prove Ruth Thompson's biological origins were systematically concealed through an elaborate conspiracy involving falsified medical records, fabricated birth certificates, and the coordination of multiple professionals who violated their oaths to hide a violent crime. She began with a photograph that had been hidden in my adoptive mother's personal effects, a faded image of a young woman who bore an unmistakable resemblance to me. Through genealogical database searches and DNA analysis of samples obtained from public records, Dr. Martinez had identified this woman as my biological mother, a member of one of the most prominent families in our county. DNA evidence conclusively proves that Ruth Thompson is the biological daughter of Margaret Whitfield, who disappeared from public view for 6 months in 1951 under circumstances that were never adequately explained. Dr. Martinez testified her words, creating a stunned silence in the courtroom. But the most devastating evidence came when she revealed how the cover-up had been orchestrated. Using recently declassified medical records and cross-referencing them with legal documents that had been sealed for decades, she had uncovered the systematic falsification of my birth certificate and the creation of an elaborate false identity that had fooled even me for over 70 years. The conspiracy involved Dr. Thompson, who falsified hospital records to show Ruth being born to Arthur and Mary Thompson Mister, Davies, who created fraudulent legal documents to support the adoption, and multiple family members who maintained the deception for 7 decades to protect the reputation of Margaret Whitfield's family and conceal the identity of Ruth's biological father. The courtroom erupted When Dr. Martinez revealed that my biological father had been a prominent local politician whose violent assault of Margaret Whitfield had been covered up to protect both families' reputations and prevent a scandal that would have destroyed multiple careers and cost millions in legal settlements. But it was Dr. Thompson's testimony that finally shattered any remaining doubt about the scope of the conspiracy. Now in his 90s and facing criminal charges for his role in falsifying government documents, the retired physician broke down completely when confronted with the irrefutable evidence of his crimes. I was young and needed the money. He confessed through tears that seemed to carry the weight of 70 years of guilt. The Whitfield family offered me more money than I made in 5 years of medical practice to create false records and keep quiet about what really happened to their daughter. I knew it was wrong, but I convinced myself I was protecting everyone involved. His testimony revealed the sophisticated nature of the conspiracy, involving not just falsified birth records, but an entire network of professionals who had been paid to maintain the deception. Medical records had been altered, legal documents had been backdated, and even newspaper archives had been modified to ensure that no trace of the truth would remain for future investigators to discover. Daniel's response to this overwhelming evidence was perhaps the most dramatic moment of the entire trial. Faced with proof that his entire claim to being my half-brother was based on fabricated documents and that his lawsuit against me had been part of a conspiracy to silence a legitimate investigation, he suffered a complete psychological breakdown that was captured by every camera in the courtroom. His carefully constructed facade of confident authority crumbled into incoherent screams of rage and desperate denials that only served to confirm his guilt and malice. She's lying. They're all lying. I have documents. I have proof. He screamed as court security moved to restrain him, his professional composure replaced by the desperate fury of someone whose entire identity had been revealed as fraudulent. But it was Mark's testimony that proved to be the most emotionally devastating moment of the trial. My son, faced with the undeniable truth about his grandparents' lifelong deception and his own active complicity in silencing my search for truth, walked to the witness stand like a man approaching his own execution. When our attorney presented him with the evidence of the conspiracy, including recorded conversations where he had explicitly stated that protecting the family's reputation was more important than my right to know the truth about my origins, Mark's carefully maintained composure finally shattered. "I knew," he whispered, his voice breaking as the weight of his betrayal settled upon him. "I knew Grandma and Grandpa were hiding something, and I knew Mom deserved to know the truth. But I was terrified of what people would think, terrified of losing the respect and social standing that came with being part of a perfect family." His breakdown was complete and public, his body shaking with sobs as he was forced to confront the magnitude of his cruelty toward his own mother. She gave everything for us, and we destroyed her to protect a lie that wasn't even ours to protect. I don't know how to live with what we've done. Watching my son's complete psychological collapse was both vindicating and heartbreaking. This was the boy I had raised, the man I had loved unconditionally, reduced to a sobbing wreck by the inevitable confrontation with his own inhumanity. Lisa sat in the gallery throughout Mark's testimony, tears streaming down her face as she witnessed the complete destruction of the family narrative she had helped maintain. Brenda, Mark's wife, attempted to distance herself from the conspiracy, but her own recorded statements about my supposed mental illness made her complicity undeniable. As I watched the lies that had shaped my entire existence finally being exposed to the light of truth, broadcast live to millions of viewers around the world, I felt something I hadn't experienced in over 2 years complete vindication. The woman who had been painted as a delusional conspiracy theorist was revealed to be a legitimate investigator whose only crime had been seeking the truth about her own identity. The family members who had claimed to be protecting me from harmful information were exposed as active participants in covering up violent crimes to protect their own social standing. The truth, in all its painful complexity, was finally being heard, and while the cost of that truth was devastating for everyone involved, I knew that justice was not just being served, it was being witnessed by a world that would never again be able to claim ignorance about the sophisticated ways that powerful families could weaponize love and concern to hide their darkest secrets. The jury's verdict was as swift as it was comprehensive. After deliberating for just 4 hours, they returned with unanimous findings of guilt on all charges. Judge Patricia Williams, her voice carrying the weight of decades of experience with family court cases, delivered a ruling that would set precedent for conspiracy and elder abuse cases nationwide. Daniel Morrison, Mark Thompson, and Lisa Thompson. She declared her words echoing through the packed courtroom and broadcast live to millions of viewers. You have been found guilty of conspiracy to commit fraud, systematic concealment of identity, criminal elder abuse, and defamation. The evidence presented in this case reveals a level of calculated deception that extends far beyond family dysfunction into the realm of criminal conspiracy. The sentences were severe and reflected the scope of the crimes. Daniel, as the primary architect of the recent conspiracy against me, was sentenced to 8 years in federal prison. Mark received 5 years for his direct complicity in the cover-up and his systematic abuse of his own mother. Lisa faced 3 years of probation and substantial financial penalties for her role in maintaining the deception. Dr. Thompson, now 91 years old, faced immediate revocation of his medical license and criminal charges for his role in falsifying government documents. The man who had built his career on the trust of families seeking medical care for their children was finally being held accountable for violating that trust in the most fundamental way possible. But beyond the criminal penalties, Judge Williams delivered something even more valuable to me, a formal judicial recognition of my character and professional integrity that would become part of the permanent legal record. Ruth Thompson. She said, looking directly at me with eyes that held both compassion and deep respect, "This court recognizes your lifelong dedication to historical accuracy, your unwavering commitment to truth in public records, and your professional integrity as a university registrar. Your reputation has been systematically attacked through one of the most sophisticated deception campaigns this court has ever encountered. But today, we restore the truth about who you really are." Her statement continued with a powerful condemnation of the tactics that had been used against me. This case represents a disturbing abuse of family relationships to silence legitimate investigation into historical crimes. The court warns that using family love and concern as weapons against truth-seeking will be prosecuted to the fullest extent of the law. The aftermath moved with swift efficiency. Within hours of the verdict, news outlets across the country were retracting their earlier coverage of my supposed mental illness and issuing corrections that acknowledged the sophisticated fraud campaign that had been waged against me. Social media platforms began removing the doctored videos that had destroyed my reputation, while new content emerged celebrating my vindication and condemning the institutional failures that had allowed the conspiracy to continue for so long. Daniel's response to his imprisonment was characteristic of the calculating narcissism he had displayed throughout the case. His few public statements continued to claim that he was the victim of a conspiracy designed to protect the real criminals who had hidden the truth about my origins. He remained utterly unable to acknowledge his role in perpetuating a cover-up of violent crime, even when faced with overwhelming evidence of his guilt. Mark's journey from that point was perhaps the most complex aspect of my victory to process. His letters from prison, which began arriving within weeks of his sentencing, revealed a man genuinely struggling to understand how he had become capable of such systematic cruelty toward his own mother. "Mom," he wrote in one particularly painful letter, "I spend every night trying to understand how I convinced myself that Grandma and Grandpa's reputation was more important than your right to know who you really are. The therapists here say that I lost my ability to see you as a person with rights and started seeing you only as a threat to the image I needed to maintain." His letters revealed someone desperately trying to rebuild his moral foundation from the ground up, questioning everything he had believed about family loyalty, social standing, and the value of truth over convenience. While I read them with the complex emotions of a mother whose son had become her tormentor, I could see glimpses of the boy I had raised, trying to find his way back to humanity. "I know I can never undo the damage I caused," he continued in another letter, "but I need you to know that I finally understand what we stole from you. It wasn't just information about your birth. It was your right to understand your own existence, and I'll spend the rest of my life trying to figure out how to live with that. But it was Lisa's transformation that gave me the greatest hope for our family's healing. My daughter, who had witnessed the full horror of what she had allowed to happen during the trial, chose to face her complicity with genuine courage rather than defensive denial. She came to see me privately just days after the sentencing, without lawyers or mediators, simply a daughter finally ready to confront the full weight of her failures. The woman who entered my hospital room looked nothing like the confident mother who had helped spread rumors about my mental decline. "Mom," she said, her voice breaking before she could say another word, "I failed you in ways I'm still trying to understand. I let them convince me that protecting our family's image was more important than protecting your right to truth. I chose comfort over courage, and I'll regret that choice for the rest of my life." Her apology wasn't performative or calculated. It was raw and honest, and filled with the kind of genuine remorse that can only come from truly understanding the magnitude of one's failures. She didn't ask for immediate forgiveness or expect instant reconciliation. She simply committed herself to whatever long, difficult process would be required to earn back even a fraction of my trust. "I know I can't undo what we did to you," she continued, tears streaming down her face as she spoke. "But I want to spend whatever time we have left proving that I can be the daughter you deserved all along." The grandchildren's journey back to me was perhaps the most heartbreaking aspect of the entire ordeal. Tom and Emily, now 17 and 15 respectively, had been devastated by the revelation that they had been manipulated into participating in their grandmother's public humiliation based on lies they had been taught to believe. Their court-appointed therapist, Dr. Robert Chen, helped me understand that their participation in the conspiracy against me had been a form of child abuse, that they had been victims of what experts called intergenerational trauma, created by adults who had weaponized family loyalty against truth and justice. When they finally came to see me, they looked like entirely different young people. Gone was the confident dismissal they had displayed in their public statements. Instead, they approached me like wounded souls seeking forgiveness they weren't sure they deserved. "Grandma," Tom said, his voice shaking with emotion, "we didn't understand what they were making us do. We thought They told us that defending the family's reputation was the right thing to do, that you were confused and trying to hurt people with false stories. Emily, struggling with the weight of what she had done at such a young age, simply collapsed into my arms and sobbed. "I'm sorry, Grandma. I'm sorry we said those terrible things about you and your work. I want to learn about real history from you. I want you to teach me how to find the truth instead of hiding from it." Sitting there with my granddaughter in my arms, feeling her genuine tears of remorse, I began to understand something crucial about forgiveness and family healing. These children had been poisoned against me by adults they trusted, but they were still children. They could still learn, still grow, still become the loving grandchildren I had always hoped for. Brenda's fate was more straightforward and more bitter. Facing complete social ostracism and the collapse of the social standing she had worked so hard to maintain, she retreated into the kind of bitter isolation that seemed fitting for someone who had made manipulation and cruelty her life's work. Her attempts to rewrite her role in the conspiracy were met with universal contempt from a community that had finally seen her true character. The victory I had won was complete in legal terms, but the real victory was more complex and more precious. The opportunity to rebuild authentic relationships based on truth instead of lies, love instead of image management, genuine connection instead of social performance. As the months passed and my family began the slow process of healing from the trauma they had both inflicted and experienced, I realized that justice and healing weren't the same thing. Justice had been served swiftly and completely. Healing would take much longer, but for the first time in over 2 years, it felt genuinely possible. The woman who had spent her career preserving historical truth had successfully fought the most important battle of her life, the struggle to reclaim her own history from those who had stolen it, and to create the possibility that future generations might inherit a legacy of honesty rather than sophisticated deception. 3 years after the trial that vindicated my life and exposed the most sophisticated family conspiracy in our state's legal history, I stood in my beautifully restored home, morning sunlight streaming through windows that now opened onto a world where I was free to exist with complete authenticity. My house, which had once felt like a museum of lies disguised as family memories, had become a true sanctuary where every photograph, every document, and every memento reflected genuine rather than manufactured history. The physical recovery from my stroke had been remarkable, aided immeasurably by the end of the psychological warfare that had been slowly killing me. My speech had returned to normal, my memory was sharper than it had been in years, and my energy had been restored in ways that surprised even my doctors. The woman who had been painted as mentally declining and physically frail was now thriving in ways that proved the devastating impact systematic emotional abuse can have on even the strongest individuals. But the most profound change wasn't physical. It was the unshakable sense of identity I had finally claimed after 72 years of living a lie. I had embraced my true origins completely, spending months researching my biological family's history and finding peace in the complex narrative that included both tragedy and resilience, violence, and survival. My biological mother, Margaret Whitfield, had been just 19 when she was assaulted by a prominent politician whose name was now part of the historical record. Rather than being ashamed of my origins, I had come to understand them as part of a larger story about women's lack of power in the 1950s and the lengths that powerful families would go to protect their reputations at the expense of truth and justice. The work I had taken on as an advocate for adoptee rights and historical accuracy had become the most meaningful pursuit of my entire life. My unique experience of uncovering a decades-old conspiracy made me a powerful voice for others who suspected that their family histories weren't what they appeared to be. I worked closely with Dr. Martinez and my legal team to develop training programs for genealogists, historians, and legal professionals, teaching them to recognize the signs of systematic record falsification and the importance of questioning official narratives when they seem too perfect or convenient. My memoir, 70 Years of Lies, a private investigator's journey to uncover her own truth, had become a bestseller in both the true crime and genealogy communities. The book tour took me across the country speaking to audiences who were hungry for tools to uncover their own family mysteries and protect themselves from the kind of institutional deception that had shaped my life. But the work that brought me the greatest joy was the support group I facilitated for adoptees who suspected their official records might be falsified. We met weekly in a bright room at the community center, creating a space where people could share their suspicions without judgment and find resources for legitimate investigation into their origins. "Ruth," said Margaret, a 60-year-old woman whose adoption records contained suspicious inconsistencies, "you taught me that my instincts about my family history mattered, that I had the right to question official documents when they didn't make sense. You gave me permission to seek the truth about my own life." These moments of connection and mutual empowerment had become the greatest treasure of my later years. Every adoptee who found their biological family, every person who uncovered long-hidden family secrets, every young person who grew up understanding that they had the right to know the truth about their origins, felt like a victory that honored not just my struggle, but the struggles of countless others who had been denied their authentic histories. Lisa's transformation had been as remarkable as my own, though infinitely more difficult to achieve. The daughter, who had once helped spread rumors about my mental decline, had spent 3 years proving her commitment to rebuilding our relationship through consistent actions rather than empty promises. Our bond had evolved into something deeper and more authentic than it had ever been, based on complete honesty rather than the careful management of image and information that had characterized our family for generations. She had become my strongest advocate in my adoption rights work, using her own experience of being manipulated into elder abuse as a teaching tool for other families. "Mom," she said one afternoon, as we worked together preparing materials for a conference on family truth and reconciliation, "I keep thinking about how much more meaningful our relationship is now that it's built on honesty instead of protecting each other from difficult truths. I wish it hadn't taken something so devastating to teach us how to really love each other." The grandchildren's healing had been perhaps the most remarkable transformation of all. Tom and Emily, now 20 and 18 respectively, had become passionate advocates for intergenerational honesty and the importance of teaching young people to value truth over social standing. Tom had decided to study forensic genealogy in college, inspired by Dr. Martinez's work in uncovering my biological origins. His senior project on the psychology of family secret keeping had been published in a professional journal and was now required reading in several graduate programs focused on family systems and trauma. "Grandma," he told me during one of our regular Sunday dinners, "everything I know about real courage and integrity, I learned from watching you fight for your truth when everyone told you to be satisfied with lies. You taught me that love doesn't manipulate, it doesn't control, and it never asks you to sacrifice your authentic self for someone else's comfort." Emily had developed a passion for historical preservation and was working as a volunteer at the same historical society that had once been used to rewrite my family's history. Her work focused on ensuring that official records reflected actual historical truth rather than sanitized versions designed to protect powerful families' reputations. "You saved us twice, Grandma," she told me one evening as we organized documents for a new exhibit on the importance of honest historical documentation. First, when we were children and needed to learn real values, and then when we were teenagers and needed to learn how to think for ourselves instead of just accepting what adults told us was true. Mark's journey continued from the considerable distance that his choices had created between us. His letters from prison had evolved from desperate pleas for forgiveness to thoughtful reflections on the process of rebuilding his moral foundation from the ground up. The rehabilitation program he was enrolled in specialized in helping people who had committed crimes against family members, and his progress reports suggested genuine transformation rather than manipulation. "Mom," he wrote in his most recent letter, "my therapist says that learning to see you as a complete person with rights, instead of just my mother who existed to serve our family's needs, is the hardest work I've ever done. I spent so many years thinking of you only in terms of what you could provide that I forgot you had your own life, your own truth, your own right to authentic existence." Reading his words, I felt a complex mixture of sadness and hope. This was my son, broken by his own choices, struggling to find redemption from a great distance. I couldn't easily forgive the years of systematic cruelty, but I could hope for his genuine healing while protecting the peace I had fought so hard to claim. Daniel remained in prison, his appeals exhausted, and his attempts at manipulation continuing even from behind bars. Dr. Thompson had died shortly after losing his medical license, carrying his guilt and shame to his grave. Brenda lived in bitter isolation, her social ambitions permanently destroyed by her role in the conspiracy. But I felt neither satisfaction nor sadness about their fates, only profound relief that their toxic influence was permanently removed from my life and the lives of anyone else they might have chosen to harm. Standing in my garden each morning, tending flowers that grew strong and beautiful under honest care, I reflected on the unexpected gifts that had emerged from the most difficult period of my life. I had lost my illusions about the automatic trustworthiness of family relationships, but I had gained an unshakable understanding of my own worth that no one could ever take away again. Most importantly, I had learned that survival wasn't enough. True healing required transformation, the kind of growth that turns personal pain into purposeful action. Like the strongest flowers in my garden, I had discovered that the deepest suffering could produce the most resilient wisdom, and that a life grounded in absolute truth could weather any storm while continuing to nurture new growth. The future stretched ahead, uncertain in its details, but grounded in the knowledge that I had faced the most sophisticated deception imaginable and had emerged not just intact, but stronger, wiser, and more committed than ever to the possibility that human beings could learn to love each other without lies, manipulation, or the cruel sacrifice of truth for convenience. Years later, as I sit in my cherished garden watching my granddaughter Emily present her research on family truth and reconciliation to a conference of professional genealogists, I marvel at the extraordinary transformation that can emerge from the deepest deception. My home, once a stage for an elaborate 70-year lie, now radiates with the warmth of relationships built on complete honesty and mutual respect rather than image management and secret keeping. The journey from victim to investigator to advocate taught me the most important lesson of my 75 years, that our greatest strength often lies not in protecting comfortable lies, but in courageously confronting difficult truths and fighting for the integrity of our own narratives. I learned that authentic identity cannot be built on foundations of deception, no matter how well-intentioned, and that real family love requires the courage to face painful realities together rather than hiding from them separately. The scars remain, of course. Mark's betrayal left wounds that may never fully heal, and the knowledge that my entire childhood was built on a lie changed me in ways that cannot be undone. But those scars have become part of my strength, proof that I survived something designed to destroy my very sense of self and emerged with my capacity for truth-seeking, not only intact, but expanded in directions I never could have imagined. Today, as I share my story with adoptees and family truth seekers across the nation, I carry a message of hope that transcends the specific details of my experience. Family deception and institutional cover-ups are not rare tragedies that happen to other people. They are sophisticated systems of control that target our most fundamental need to understand our own origins. But truth will ultimately prevail over even the most elaborate lies. Authentic identity can be reclaimed even after decades of systematic deception, and a life of purpose and genuine connection is always possible, no matter how late in the journey the healing begins. The woman who spent her career preserving other people's historical truth learned that sometimes the most important investigation is the one that uncovers your own authentic story. Like the strongest plants in my garden, I discovered that the deepest roots often grow in the most challenging soil, and that a spirit grounded in absolute honesty can weather any storm while continuing to nurture truth for future generations. My legacy now extends far beyond the individual records I maintained during my career as a registrar. It lives in every adoptee who finds the courage to question suspicious documents, every family that chooses transparency over reputation management, every young person who grows up understanding that they have the fundamental right to know the truth about their own existence. It lives in the knowledge that one woman's refusal to accept comfortable lies can spark changes that protect countless others from similar deception, and that the simple act of demanding authentic information about your own life can transform not just personal relationships, but entire institutions' understanding of what truth and family really mean.